The Retribution Paladin rework is live, and in this guide, we are going to be going over what Retribution Paladin is, the utility that Retribution Paladin brings to your party or raid team, the mechanics of how to play the class, as well as some builds and talents to keep your eyes on. Let's get into it. I will have timestamps down below, so if you're a veteran player and you already know about Retribution Paladin, you already know the mechanics of the class, you just want to get straight to the builds and the talents, there will be timestamps down below for you to find that. So what is Retribution Paladin? Retribution Paladin is a melee plate-wearing hybrid class. But what does that all mean? So melee means you have to be within 5 yards of your target in order to do damage to the target, versus a ranged player that can be up to 30 yards away from the target to do damage. Plate simply means they wear plate armor, which is the highest armor rating in the game. And hybrid simply means that the paladin as a class can cover the healer, DPS, and tank roles. So generally this means that each role has a little bit of power carried over from the others. So why play Ret Paladin? Ret Paladin have really strong off heals with spells like Word of Glory, Lay on Hands, and even the ability to spam Flash of Light. They can really help your healer out if you're in a pinch. Retribution Paladin also has really strong utility with a whole array of blessings that they can cast on their party members. They have Blessing of Freedom that can prevent and remove roots and snares off of a single player. They have Blessing of Protection that can grant immunity to physical damage and harmful effects. And they have Blessing of Sacrifice that they can cast on a party or raid member that will reduce their damage received by 30% and instead reflect that onto the paladin. But that's not all they can do. They can remove poison and disease effects with Cleanse Toxins. They can incapacitate a target for up to a minute with Repentance. They can also disorientate a large amount of enemies with Blinding Light. They can cause demon, aberration, and undead enemies to flee with Turn Evil. And they have one of the shortest cooldown but longest stuns in the game with Hammer of Justice. And with talents like Lightforged Blessing, they can heal up to 4 allies for 3% of the paladin's maximum health just by casting Divine Storm. They also bring auras. Paladins have 4 different auras that they can choose from to buff their party or raid team. You can only have 1 aura per paladin, and players only need to be within 40 yards of the paladin casting the aura to receive the buff. The auras are Devotion Aura, which gives a 3% damage reduction to all party and raid members within 40 yards of the paladin. You can have Concentration Aura that causes interrupt and silence effects to be 30% shorter. You can have Crusader Aura that increases the mount speed of all party and raid members by 20%, and my personal favorite, Retribution Aura, that gives your party or raid a 5% damage and healing increase, decaying over 30 seconds anytime another party or raid member takes a single hit of damage worth 30% of their health. Retribution Paladin is also pretty tanky, with talents like Sanctified Plates, new access to additional defensives, and talents like Aegis of Protection that buff those defensives. Retribution Paladins can finally take a hit. And one more reason to play Retribution Paladin is because they have access to the ability Instrument of Retribution. Instrument of Retribution means anytime a party or raid member dies, you are instantly granted access to wings for 12 seconds. Now we're going to be moving on to the mechanics of how to play Retribution Paladin. Retribution Paladin is a builder-spender style class, which means they use their abilities to build up resources and then spend those resources on other abilities to do big damage. And that resource that they use is called Holy Power. Each paladin can hold up to 5 Holy Power max. If you're already at max Holy Power and you cast a Holy Power generating ability, that Holy Power will not generate a 6 Holy Power. So you have essentially wasted a Holy Power. This is what's known as overcapping Holy Power, and it should be avoided at all costs. The first Holy Power generator I want to talk about is Crusader Strike. Crusader Strike is a melee ability that strikes your target for physical damage and generates 1 Holy Power. The second Holy Power generator that I want to talk about is Blade of Justice. Blade of Justice has a 12-yard range and pierces your enemy for holy damage, generating 1 Holy Power. One note about Blade of Justice is that it has a lot of talents that can modify how the spell works. For example, you could take Holy Blade that causes your Blade of Justice to generate 2 Holy Power. Our next Holy Power generating ability is Hammer of Wrath. Hammer of Wrath is a 30-yard ability that deals holy damage. However, it can only be used on enemies with 20% or less health or during your Avenging Wrath. The next holy power generating ability is actually a talent, and it's called Wake of Ashes. Wake of Ashes is a 14-yard frontal that stuns demon and undead enemies and generates 3 holy power. The next, and I would argue most important holy power generating ability is Judgment. Judgment is a 30-yard ability that deals holy damage. What makes Judgment so important is that when combined with the talent Greater Judgment, it causes your target to take 20% increased damage from your next holy power spender. And our last holy power generating ability, which is also my personal favorite, is Divine Toll. Divine Toll instantly casts Judgment on up to 5 enemies within 30 yards, and the damage that each of those judgments deal is upped by 100%. So we've talked about the holy power generators, now let's talk about the holy power spenders. Our first holy power spender is Templar's Verdict. Templar's Verdict is our big single target damage dealer. It deals holy damage and it costs 3 holy power. Our next holy power spender is Divine Storm. Divine Storm is our primary way of dealing AoE, or area of effect damage. Divine Storm costs 3 holy power and does full damage up to 5 targets and does reduced damage past 5. Our next holy power spender is Word of Glory. This is our big single target heal. This one's pretty straightforward. It costs 3 holy power and it causes your target to be healed. And our last holy power spending ability is Shield of the Righteous. Now, this is not one that Retribution Paladins normally run by any means, as it requires you to have a shield, and Retribution Paladins like two-handers. However, there is a very memey build that lets you run Shield of the Righteous. Our big cooldown is Avenging Wrath. Avenging Wrath is pretty simple. Hit that button, do 20% increased healing and damage. It also allows you to hit any target with Hammer of Wrath, regardless of their health, for 20 seconds. 2 abilities that I want to talk about that are very important to Paladin's playstyle are Final Reckoning and Execution Sentence. Final Reckoning is a AoE ability that causes all targets affected by it to take 30% increased damage from your holy power spenders for 12 seconds. Execution Sentence is a single target ability that causes the target to take 20% increase from all of your abilities for 8 seconds. One thing to note on Final Reckoning and Executioner Sentence, you want to do what's called pooling holy power. So you want to get as much holy power before you cast those abilities as possible. The reason for this is because you have 12 seconds or 8 seconds with Executioner Sentence to deal as much damage as possible. Your holy power spenders generate far and above more damage than any of your other abilities. So you want to make sure and cast as many of your holy power spending abilities in those tight windows as possible. Our primary movement ability is Divine Steed. Divine Steed mounts you up on your charger and increases your movement speed by 100% for 3 seconds. Through talents, not only can you get 2 charges of Divine Steed, but the duration can also be increased to 6 seconds. Our 2 primary defenses are Shield of Vengeance and Divine Protection. Shield of Vengeance casts an Absorb Shield on you for 15 seconds, and once that shield is broken or the time runs out, it deals that damage spread to all enemies around. Divine Protection reduces damage you take by 20% for 8 seconds, and that percent can be up to 30 through a talent. Our last and most powerful defensive is called Divine Shield, also sometimes referred to as Bubble. Divine Shield grants immunity to all damage, all knockbacks, all harmful effects, and any forced movements. So now that we've looked at how Retribution Paladins do damage, let's talk about how to maximize that damage by looking at our rotation. So rotation is not the correct term. It's actually a term that's held over from an older time in World of Warcraft's past. How we really want to think about it is actually a priority list, meaning in certain situations, certain abilities are more important than others. So for example, if I'm at 5 holy power, I don't want to be casting another holy power generating ability because that would be overcapping. Instead, what I want to do is use a holy power spender so that I can create space to generate more holy power. The priority list is as follows. Avenging Wrath, our big cooldown that gives us 20% increased damage for 20 seconds. Final Reckoning or Executioner Sentence. Templar's Verdict for single target. Divine Storm if you have 2 or more targets. Wake of Ashes if you're at 2 or less holy power. Divine Toll, Hammer of Wrath, Blade of Justice, and Judgment if you have 3 or less holy power, or if your Judgment debuff is not on the target.
So now what I want to do, guys, is take everything we've talked about and put it all together. So I'm going to do my best to talk through the rotation as I'm doing it in real time, and hopefully that'll give you some insight as to what our priority list actually looks like in action. And here we go. We target this guy, Wings, Blade, CS, Judgment with the debuff, Executioner Sentence, Templar's Verdict, Wake, Templar's Verdict, Divine Toll. Hey guys, Editing Rollie here. One of the things that I failed to mention on this segment was that if you notice when I hit Divine Toll, my holy power shoots all the way up to 5. This is because of all the target dummies around me. In a single target scenario, you would only have one target, so it would only generate 1 holy power. So if you're in a cleave scenario, however many targets Divine Toll hits, that's the number of holy power it generates at a maximum of 5 targets. The other thing I wanted to mention was Divine Resonance. So every 5 seconds for 15 seconds after hitting Divine Toll, judgments will automatically be casted for me outside of my normal judgment. Because our stat priority has changed with the rework, haste now has less value. So one of the effects of this is that by the time I am able to generate 4 holy power, the next Divine Resonance is already about to be cast. So I feel like it's a waste to cast another judgment for the debuff. So I just let Divine Resonance cast the judgment for me, and I'm playing around Divine Resonance so I can build up 4 holy power, get a Divine Resonance judgment, and then follow up with a Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm, or so have you. All right, back to the video. And we just keep going, building up holy power, spending holy power, making sure that we're keeping our judgment debuff up on the target anytime we cast a Templar's Verdict, and we're just going. You're just building and spending over and over and over again. One thing I do want to note, guys, is sometimes your priority list can change depending on the talents that you run. For example, on single target, I run Vengeful Wrath, which Hammer of Wrath always critically strikes. And with Adjudication, which gives us 5% more critical strike damage, our Hammer of Wraths are now hitting for 105% critical strike damage. This, to me, ups it on the priority list. Because I only have a 20-second window to cast Hammer of Wrath, I want to make sure I'm casting as many Hammer of Wraths as I can during not only my Execution Sentence window, but also just in my Wings window in general. Because Divine Toll and Wake of Ashes have longer cooldowns, I'm actually okay holding them for a few seconds so that I can get more Hammer of Wraths off, because no matter what, they're stuck to a 30-second and a 1-minute cooldown, and it won't mess up your cooldown lineup too much. Also note, for single target, I'm also taking Vanguard's Momentum, which gives me another charge of Hammer of Wrath. So now I have 2 charges of Hammer of Wrath, so that's 2 guaranteed critically striking abilities during our Execution Sentence window and during our Wings.
So now let's get to my favorite part, the builds. So right here is a pretty basic Mythic Plus build. Some talents of note are Blessing of Sacrifice. This is really good when you're helping out your party with big damage. You can cast Bubble on yourself, and then you can cast Sack. It's called a Bubble Sack. You will take none of the damage, but they will get 30% reduced damage. It's really helpful in M+, where your tank is going to take a big hit, or where there's party-wide damage. You can not only save yourself from not taking any damage, but you can also help a party member take less damage. So you can cast that on the healers so that they can then focus on everybody else. One of my absolute favorite talents is Healing Hands. The cooldown of Lay on Hands is reduced by up to 60% based on the target's missing health, and Word of Glory healing is increased by up to 100% based on the target's missing health. This is super helpful in M+, where somebody takes a bolt of Etch or Cinder Bolt or something like that, and they get chunked to half health, and you can just instantly spot heal with a Word of Glory almost up to full. We've talked about Lightforged Blessing already, but this is huge. Just you doing damage heals the party. A very, very strong and one of the most paladin spells I've ever seen. Divine Purpose. Holy Power abilities have a 10% chance to make your next Holy Power ability free and deal 10% increased damage and healing. This is really good where if you need to pump out that extra damage, or sometimes you need to really help heal, so you cast a Word of Glory on a team member, and then you get a Divine Purpose proc, and then you can cast another one for 10% increased healing. I love Divine Purpose. A big talent that has caused a lot of controversy lately is Vanguard of Justice. Your damaging holy power abilities cost 1 additional holy power and deal 20% increased damage. So we do 20% more damage on our Templar's Verdict and our Divine Storm, but now it costs 4 holy power instead of 3 holy power. This one takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you get used to it, it's very strong. One of the things that can supplement Vanguard of Justice is Boundless Judgment, which Judgment now generates an additional holy power. In my opinion, if you're gonna play Vanguards of Justice, you need to be playing Boundless Judgment as well as Holy Blade, which causes our Blade of Justice to generate 1 additional holy power. One more big thing to note on not only this build, but all of the builds, is that Avenging Wrath Might adds a 20% increased critical strike chance to our wings on top of 20% increased damage, but it keeps wings down at a 1-minute cooldown versus if you take Crusade, which is a lot stronger. If you were only to use Crusade and you were only to use Avenging Wrath Might, Crusade is the stronger spell. However, it is a 2-minute cooldown versus a 1-minute cooldown, making it fall behind overall to Avenging Wrath Might. Tempest of the Lightbringer is a guaranteed need on not only Mythic Plus, but anywhere you have multiple targets. Divine Storm projects an additional wave of light, striking all enemies up to 20 yards in front of you for 20% of Divine Storm's damage. So every Divine Storm that you cast, there is a second Divine Storm that shoots out from you for 20 yards, and that Divine Storm does 20% of the damage of your base Divine Storm. One thing to note, if you're running this, you got to be really careful of where you point this. It shoots out in front of you and it goes 20 yards. There have been a lot of ninja pulls with this ability. Another really important and notable talent is Blessed Champion. Crusader Strike and Judgment hit additional 4 targets, but deal 50% reduced damage to secondary targets. So in the same way that Divine Toll hits a bunch of enemies, that's essentially how Blessed Champion functions with Judgment. This is really big when you tie it in with Greater Judgment, which is our Judgment debuff that causes anybody hit by Judgment to take 20% increased damage from our Holy Power spenders. Now, in a Mythic Plus scenario, your Judgment is now an AoE Judgment, so all of those enemies are now taking 20% increased damage from your next Divine Storm. It's huge. Not only that, but your Crusader Strike is also now an AoE ability. And when you tie that in with Templar Strikes, which Crusader Strike becomes a 2-part combo, Templar Strike slashes an enemy for radiant damage, and then if you hit it again within 4 seconds, Templar Slash strikes an enemy for radiant damage and has a 100% increased chance to critically strike. So it will always critically strike. Now you have an AoE critically striking ability, and for a little bit of extra damage, you can tie that in with Adjudication, which critical strike damage of your abilities is increased by 5%. So Templar Slash, the second part of the combo that critically strikes for 100%, it's now effectively hitting for 105%, and that is in an AoE situation, so it adds up. So now I want to draw your attention down here to Burning Crusade. Divine Storm, Divine Hammer, and Consecration now deal radiant damage, and your abilities that deal radiant damage deal 5% increased damage. So Divine Storm, Divine Hammer, Consecration, Templar Strike / Templar Slash, all those now deal 5% increased damage. And that feeds into Searing Light, where your abilities that deal radiant damage have a chance to call down an explosion of holy fire, dealing an X amount of radiant damage to all nearby enemies and leaving a consecration in its wake. This deals damage beyond 8 targets is reduced. Searing Light does actually really decent amount of damage, and when you combine that with Consecration, it not only drops a consecration, but that means you can drop a second consecration. So now you effectively have 2 consecrations, basically dealing double the damage. And with a talent like Consecrated Blade, where your Blade of Justice automatically triggers consecration once every 30 seconds, Searing Light and Consecrated Blade are great together. All right, so now let's look at a pure single target build. Some stuff stays the same. We still take Templar Strikes. We still have Swift Justice. We still have Final Verdict, but if you look here, Jurisdiction, Final Verdict, and Blade of Justice deal 10% increased damage. The range on Final Verdict and Blade of Justice is increased by 20 yards. When you're on a raid boss and they typically have a lot of movement that happens in raids, having that extra, 15 yards on your abilities is great. But not only that, they deal 10% increased damage. Jurisdiction's a great one to pick up for single target. Again, we're running Vanguards of Justice in conjunction with Boundless Judgment, which gives us an additional holy power when we cast Judgment. And if you'll notice, we're running Execution Sentence instead of Final Reckoning for the single target build. Another great one is Executioner's Will. Final Reckoning and Execution Sentence durations are increased by 4 seconds. So instead of the normal 8 seconds of Executioner Sentence, it's up to 12 seconds. And Final Reckoning is up to 16 seconds. Another talent to note is Vengeful Wrath. Hammer of Wrath always critically strikes. When you tie that in with Adjudication, which critical strike damage of your abilities is increased by 5%, and Hammer of Wrath critical strikes cause a blessed hammer to spiral outward, dealing holy strike damage to enemies. Now, the blessed hammer coming out and dealing extra damage, at the end of the day, it's not very significant, but any damage increase is good. So really the reason we take Adjudication is the critical strike damage increased by 5%. So Hammer of Wrath is now effectively dealing 105% of critical strike damage, and we get the Blessed Hammer on top of it. Extra damage is always good. But Adjudication leads into Blades of Light, which is Crusader Strike, Judgment, Hammer of Wrath, and your damage single target holy power abilities deal holy strike damage. Holy strike damage is holy and physical damage, and that feeds nicely into Divine Arbiter, which is our abilities that deal holy strike damage deal 5% increased damage, and casting abilities that deal holy strike damage grant you a stack of Divine Arbiter. At 25 stacks, your next damaging single target holy power ability causes holy strike damage to your primary target and additional holy strike damage to enemies within 6 yards. Links of both of these builds will be down in the description below, but one thing I want to note is there's no perfect one-size-fits-all build for everybody. If you'd like an in-depth look at the talents, I have a video that I'll link up in the corner as well as down in the description below, where I go over every single talent in the rework. One of the things I want to point out with the rework is now we kind of have to choose between single target and multi-target, where before we didn't really lose a whole lot of value going multi-target versus single target. Now with the rework and with the sheer number of talents that we have, we do kind of suffer if we want to do more single target or more multi-target. So with that, there's no one size fits all for talents. You're always going to have to sacrifice somewhere to buff the other one. So please, by no means, don't think like, oh, this is the only one that I run for raid bosses. There are raid bosses that have cleave. There are council bosses where you're continuously cleaving other bosses all the time. If you'd like a breakdown of all the talents, I'm gonna link to a video up top where I go over every single talent in the talent tree. I'll also leave a link to it down in the description below, but check that out if you have more questions on specific talents. And as always, you can leave a comment down below and you can hit me up on Twitter or Discord if you have any questions. So that's gonna be it for me, guys. This is my very first guide that I've ever put, so any feedback, any comments whatsoever, please leave them down in the comments below. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. And as always, if you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter, you can hit me up on Discord. I do stream on Twitch fairly regularly, so you can find me there. Thank you so much for watching the video, guys. I really appreciate it. And as always, Ret Pumps.